Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the AnthroPuzzled podcast. I'm your host, Abby Letzinger, and every 2 weeks we'll explore how anthropologists are forging unique career paths beyond the usual academic sphere. Tune in, get inspired, and start piecing together your own career puzzle within the world of anthropology. On today's episode, we have Shauna Mundt. She graduated from San Jose State University with a master's in applied anthropology and from the University of California, Berkeley with a bachelor's in anthropology. She is a senior historical archaeologist at Pacific Legacy, Inc., a cultural resource management firm in Folsom, California, and vice president and lead archaeologist for the Martinez Cemetery Preservation Alliance, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving the history of the Alhambra Pioneer Cemetery in Martinez, California. How are you doing today, Shauna?
I'm well. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, of course. So what exactly is a historical archaeologist and how are they different from other subfields of archaeology?
So historical archaeology combines archaeological data, which is the physical material culture that is left behind, with written historical records to study the past. So things like property records, insurance documents and maps, census records, even personal diaries, etc. What we call the historic period varies throughout the world. In North America, it begins with European invasion and colonization. On the East Coast, it starts in the 1500s. In California, it's a little later. While there were Spanish explorers who explored the California coast in the 1500s, and there are written records of that, colonization of coastal California did not begin in earnest until the 1700s and not until the mid to late 1800s for much of inland California. So historical archaeology is basically, archaeology from the historic period on, which, like I just said, varies.
Okay. What does a typical day look like for a historical archaeologist?
Well, first I want to briefly go over what cultural resources management is, CRM, which is what I do because it's very different from academic archaeology. CRM is the process of identifying, evaluating, preserving, and managing cultural and archaeological resources. Private CRM firms like the one I work for contract with local, state, and federal agencies to help them with their environmental compliance, which includes cultural resources. These are legislated at the state and federal level. In California, we have the California Environmental Quality Act, which governs environmental and cultural resource review. And then at the federal level, cultural resources are governed by Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. So in academia, practitioners are often students and professors, and they tend to focus on like a specific time period or a geographic area or site, and therefore have like a certain level of choice about where they want to work. Their work is typically dependent on grants and is often published. They are still subject to cultural resource policies, of course, but the types of projects that are available to them are different. CRM archaeologists don't get to choose our projects, where we work, and what level of investigation we conduct is dependent on what the project is and who it is for. So, for example, let's say that the California Department of Transportation, or Caltrans, plans to add an exit along a major freeway. Since they receive both state and federal funding, they are subject to both state and federal cultural resource policies. So Caltrans notifies their CRM contractor, such as the firm I work for, about the project, what it is, where, etc. And then the CRM firm creates project maps, conducts background research of the project area to determine whether or not it has been previously studied and if there are any known archaeological resources. If it has not been recently studied, we conduct a survey to relocate any known archaeological resources that are within the project area and see if there are any new ones. We then write up our findings. Depending on our findings, additional investigations such as excavations may be needed. So that is a very long way to say a typical day for an archaeologist. It varies and depends on a lot of things. What your position is in the company, what the project is, etc. A field technician's typical day is going to be different than that of a project manager or principal investigator. We have different responsibilities depending on our experience level. So like field work can include survey, excavation, or construction monitoring. Office work includes background research, producing maps, consulting with tribes, processing artifacts in the lab, and writing reports.
And when you say archaeological resources, that's like artifacts or biological remains, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so archaeological, we call them cultural resources, and that includes built environment. A cultural resource is anything that's 50 years or older. So that it can include built environment stuff. It's the material culture left behind. It's a variety of things.
What role do ethics play in historical archaeology?
In the US, there are a number of national archaeological societies: Society for American Archaeology, Society for Historical Archaeology. Those are two of them. Plus, individual states have their own. In California, we have the Society for California Archaeology, and all of these organizations have guiding principles for conducting ethical archaeology. Essentially, what it boils down to is that we are stewards of the past and are responsible for ensuring that cultural resources are protected and preserved. We conduct ourselves honestly and adhere to the federal, state, local, tribal, indigenous, and international laws, as well as agency regulations that govern us. This also includes maintaining the confidentiality of site locations, which are restricted from public access.
And do you guys do a lot of consulting work with the local indigenous groups?
So tribal yes, we do participate in that. However, as consultants, it's not our job. The lead agency in charge of the project is in charge of consulting with the tribe. It's considered government to government consultation because tribes are considered government entities.
Okay, I didn't know that. What are some of the challenges that you guys face when you're working on historical archaeological sites?
So I think you're going to face similar challenges at any archaeological site, no matter what time period it's from. You get disturbances from natural processes like weather and erosion, animals, livestock, people, looting. Looting is a big one. People like to collect things. Can't tell you the number of times I've had someone tell me that they love archaeology and go out hunting bottles or for arrowheads. And it's really frustrating because not only does it affect the archaeological record, but it is actually illegal to collect artifacts from public lands. So, is what it is.
Yeah.
I think, though, that what a lot of us face more is recognizing, particularly historical archaeologists, is how historic period activities have impacted pre-contact Native American sites. So, for example, in the Sierra Nevada foothills in California, there was prolific mining in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. You'll find archaeological evidence of mining such as pits, ditches, mining cuts, etc. And often within or adjacent to those historic period features, you'll find a single Native American bedrock milling station. Mining needs water, and so do people. So it's super common for Native American and historic period sites to be in the same place because humans go where the resources are. So in these cases, there were Native Americans living in the foothills, minding their own business, and then got pushed out by the influx of Euro-American miners. Miners came in, mined the land, destroyed most of the evidence that Native people lived there, save for the stationary features such as bedrock milling stations, which are, in immovable bedrock. So we as practitioners have to remember to consider that when we're recording historic period sites.
Yeah, so with NAGPRA, if you guys were to come across any of these tribal sites or indigenous sites, do you have to, I'm sure you have to put it in your report that you've come across these kinds of things, but what's kind of the process after you might find some kind of historical artifacts or anything like that?
So in California, all cultural resources are recorded on specific site recordation forms called DPRs. They're run by the Department of Parks and Recreation, and it's managed through the California Office of Historic Preservation. All of these records, which include site records and studies, so the reports that people write about the things that they find, are housed in the CRIS. It's the California Historical Resources Information System, and all of those records are housed there, and they have the records, the GIS, all kinds of, you want cultural resource data, that's where it lives. And you have to have an agreement with the CRIS in order to access that data. It's not open to the public. So all of that stuff is really carefully managed. So when we go out and do a project and we record a new site, we give it a temporary number, we fill it out on the appropriate forms, and then we submit it to the CRIS where it gets what's called a P number or primary record number. And in California, those are all the numbers are associated with the county. Each state does it differently. I don't know how they do it in other states, but so I can only speak for California.
Do you guys work a lot with GIS and LiDAR remote sensing?
Oh, we absolutely use GIS. GIS is an essential part. We have to produce maps for all of our projects. We need to be able to look at the project area and see, we send the GIS that we get from the project to the CRIS when we do our record search to see if there's any previous studies and previously recorded resources in there. So having that GIS is really, really important.
Do you have to take any additional classes or certifications to operate or work with GIS?
Not necessarily. We definitely have some people on our staff that, have GIS specialties, have done, either majored in it in college or have gotten certifications. It helps because the Software can be pretty complicated, but you don't necessarily need that. Like, I don't have an extra certification, but I know how to use GIS just because I learned it. Somebody else showed me.
Okay, cool. So what kind of led you into this career path?
So I had sort of a kind of an unusual path to get here. In my 20s, I worked in corporate aviation as a dispatcher and scheduler for a private aircraft management firm. I didn't go to college, and it was just kind of a job that I fell into and turned out to be really good at. When I was in my early 30s, I suffered significant vision loss due to diabetic retinopathy caused by type 1 diabetes, which I've had since I was a kid. It came on pretty quickly, and I had to have a number of surgeries, including the removal of my right eye. So this whole thing left me legally blind and unable to drive or do my job. So I went on disability. And after a couple of years of not doing much, I was pretty bored. So I enrolled in some classes at the local community college. I did not really have a plan. I was just trying to stay busy. But I fell in love with anthropology and ended up transferring to UC Berkeley to pursue my bachelor's degree. I originally wanted to be a cultural anthropologist and work for the UN and fight for women's rights. I had all these big plans of things that I was going to do. But my first semester at UC Berkeley, I was required to take an American cultures requirement class. And so I took a class called American Material Culture, which was an historical archaeology class that focused on U.S. following colonization. And I absolutely loved it. I loved the material culture part of it, like the stuff. The glass, ceramics, jewelry, the buttons, cookbooks. I love seeing how these things changed over time. So we did a project in that class where we looked at the evolution of recipes and cookbooks from the 17 and 1800s. And it was fascinating to see the regional variations of the same dishes, as well as the influence from Native American and West African food traditions from enslaved people. Following semester, I took a class called Archaeology of Sex and Gender. And I think by midterms, I had signed up for an apprenticeship in the historical archaeology lab, a senior honors thesis, and an archaeological field school. So I was pretty hooked. And, I had a lot of support from both my professors and their graduate student instructors, two of whom greatly influenced me and who are now university professors themselves. So I went straight to graduate school to San Jose State to get my master's. I graduated 2 years later in 2018 at the age of 43. So Pacific Legacy was the third place I sent my resume to after I graduated. They hired me, and I've been there ever since. So I feel very fortunate to have landed where I have, especially, restarting a career later in life, can be a little scary because who knows? I didn't know what was going to happen, but it all worked out.
Yeah, that's the scary thing. Or nowadays, society is oh, if you don't have your degree or what you want to do by the time you leave college, at the age of 22 or however old, you're behind. And I know a lot of people struggle with this. I mean, I struggle with this because I'm going back to school because I feel like the degrees that I have now aren't helping me too much in getting the jobs that I'm wanting. So I kind of feel like I'm starting all over again. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so behind from everybody else. How am I ever going to make a career in time? So just hearing other individual stories of, you've had one career and then you're like, I'm just going to do a whole restart and everything still works out just fine, kind of gives me a little hope that everything will be okay.
Well, and I think the skills that we learn in previous jobs, so my career at the airport was, I learned a lot of management. I learned how to manage fast-paced, in a fast-paced environment, a lot of people and whatnot. And those skills that I learned there transfer really well into project management and archaeology. So it's just, how you are able to take what you learned from previous things and see if they can fit into what you're doing now.
Yeah, definitely. So tell me a little bit more about the Martinez Cemetery Preservation Alliance. It's the nonprofit that I had mentioned earlier in your introduction, that it's dedicated to preserving the history of the Alhambra Pioneer Cemetery that's in Martinez, California. So what exactly is with that project?
So I got involved with this project in 2017. I was in grad school. A friend of mine saw a post on a local Facebook page that was advertising a day of public archaeology. And so I just showed up, and the people that were running it, Joseph and Judy Palmer, were super excited that I was, an archaeology student. And they had started this group called the Potter's Field Restoration Project, which basically wanted to clean up an Potter's Field portion of the cemetery cemetery and try to identify some of the people that, were buried there, because Judy is a genealogist. And it just sort of snowballed from there. So like the reason they were doing archaeology there is because when they were cleaning up the Potter's Field, they found the crumbled remains of a 19th century Chinese funerary burner. And so they were, taking it apart and excavating around it, just sort of collecting all of the things. And we ended up forming the Martinez Cemetery Preservation Alliance in 2018, sort of born of that, with the goal, of preserving and maintaining the entire cemetery, and then also conducting additional research and rebuilding the Chinese funerary burner. So we have Chris Rousset. He's a historical architect, and he has designed the funerary burner that we're going to rebuild. And so, that's kind of how that all unfolded. We're completely volunteer based. We're small. Things do not move quickly, because we all have jobs and other responsibilities and whatnot. And then, COVID kind of slowed us down as well. But ultimately, the goal is to get the cemetery very well documented and nominate it for inclusion on the National Register of Historic Places. It's currently a California historical point of interest, but we'd like to get it on the National Register. But we've held a couple public archaeology days where we sort of have people come out, and we've had volunteers come out and take photographs and georeference all of the headstones so that we can have sort of a digital reference guide for people who want to identify their deceased.
With the public archaeology events that you guys have, do you guys have like a variety of different events that you hold? Because I had an interview with the public archaeologist here in Northwest Florida, and they would do like ferry rides, because we have a ferry here in Pensacola, Florida, that goes to one of the old forts that we have. And then they do bike rides and nature trails. So do you guys do something along those lines?
So I see where you're going with this. So essentially, the cemetery is owned by the city of Martinez. So it is, it's not public land, and it's no longer in use. And so it's not open to the public all the time. And so, but every year in May and October, the city hosts a cemetery cleanup, which is hosted by them and Campus Vitus. So whatever the group number of the clampers is in Martinez, everybody comes out, they help clean out all the branches and the weeds, and, make sure that the cemetery looks nice and it's not a fire hazard and all that stuff. And then the clampers feed everyone lunch, which is very nice. So we have people come out on those days. And we've had people come out and help us finish taking down the burner and cleaning off the bricks. And then last year we had, as I mentioned previously, we had a group of people come out and take photographs of the cemetery to document it. So it's kind of like that, but we only do it twice a year because of sort of the restrictions with the city. And, the city doesn't have they have other things that are more important, other city business that's more pressing. And so we just try to incorporate the things that we want to do with things that they already have planned.
Okay. So a smart use of funds, essentially, in everybody's time. Do you ever have individuals who come to these events and they're like, oh, my ancestor is actually buried in here, or anything like that?
We have. So as I said before, Judy Palmer, who is our treasurer, and she's a genealogist, and she has helped people find their decedents. And she's also identified several people that were in the Potter's Field. And we've had headstones restored for them, because the Potter's Field only has these small little, cement blocks with numbers on them. And unfortunately, the city no longer has the records. We don't know what happened to them. So we've had to do a lot of archival research to try and figure out who was where. And we've been able to figure out a couple people. One of the people that is buried in the Potter's Field is Aaron Rice, who he was an enslaved man from Kentucky who came out to California, and he's associated with the Rice estate, which I think is either in Kentucky or Missouri.
With the archival work that you do you have to go to like a library, or I don't want to say city hall, because I don't know if that's the kind of records they keep, but where do you kind of do your archival work?
So for the genealogy research for the MCPA, all of that is done online. We have subscriptions to Ancestry.com, to newspapers, to all of the, Find a Grave, all of those kind of websites where you can look for people and cross-reference information, look for obituaries, look at church records, things like that.
Oh, okay. That's really cool. Is there one site that kind of holds all the cemetery information throughout the state, or is it there's multiple websites, like no one's talking to each other, they all kind of got their own
There's
thing going?
multiple websites. Yeah.
Okay, cool. With being a cultural resource manager, what kind of salary does someone make in this kind of career path?
I would say that, it varies. It's if you're inexperienced, if you're fresh out of grad school and inexperienced, you're going to start pretty low. I think in California, the range for, kind of a mid-level 10 to 12 years of experience person is going to be $75,000 to $100,000 per year. So, this isn't a career that's going to make you rich. Kind of the running joke is like you have to really love archaeology to do it because the work is hard and the pay sucks. Like I used to have a bumper sticker on my car that said, I became an archaeologist for the money and fame, which is really only funny if you're an archaeologist. But.
Now, do you need a degree to be a cultural resource manager?
Yes, you need at minimum a bachelor's degree. A lot of the federal policies state that you have to be a Secretary of the Interior. You have to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. And that typically means you have to have a master's degree. So you have to have a master's degree to author reports and to, be considered a principal investigator. So yes, you have to have an advanced degree to do this and really move ahead. I know a couple people who have made careers of this with bachelor's degrees. If you don't want to be a project manager, if you don't want to be a principal investigator, if you enjoy the field work and that's essentially all you want to do, then absolutely, bachelor's degree would be just fine.
Do you have any advice for individuals who might be wanting to pursue a master's for this kind of career path?
I would say, find your niche, become an expert in something specific, ask a lot of questions. Don't be afraid to not know everything and put yourself out there. The point of grad school is to kind of know what you want to do, but to also figure it out. So like I knew I wanted to, when I went to grad school, I thought I either wanted to work in a museum. And that was basically my goal. I was like, I want to get my degree in applied anthropology and be an historical archaeologist, but work in a museum. I did not expect to end up in cultural resources management. So, but I knew that I wanted to work with material culture. So, find your niche, find the thing that you're passionate about, but also, be flexible.
Yeah. And it's super impressive what archaeologists do because I had a class, I think it was like Introduction to Archaeology. And for extra credit, he's like, hey, go up to the archaeology lab and help them sort through pottery, rocks, metals, that kind of stuff. And then they put it in front of you. And I'm like, all of this looks the same. And one girl come over like, oh, no, this is like an olive jar. This is a jar. And I'm just like, can I just have the magnetic stick to get all the metal out? And then I'll pass it on to somebody else. So having to study the difference, because you kind of also have to study geology, like is this a bone? Is this a rock? Is this pottery shards? And having to know what the difference is, without having to lick it. That's the big joke in anthropology is like, I'm glad you brought that. Like if you want to know if it's bone or rock, just stick it on your tongue. You're like, no, you should not be putting anything in your mouth.
Yeah, we're kind of but we're the type of people, archaeologists is the type of people who are like, hell yeah, I'll put that in my mouth. I mean, that's, it's very Wild West out there in the field.
I have to give y'all mad props. I like my air conditioning and, not having to be out in the elements and you guys being out there all day and braving God knows what. I have a friend, she's doing CRM work right now while she's waiting for some maritime positions to open up because she's a maritime archaeologist. She's like, I'm out here in the cold and it's raining and I'm covered in mud. But she's like, but I don't know. I just love it. It's a love-hate relationship.
Yeah, it's, we tell like horror stories of we like the horror stories of the fields but, we romanticize it because it is, you have fun out there with people and, you can laugh about the time you stepped into an irrigation ditch that you thought was just weeds and ended up waist deep in water. It was freeze out. So that you were cold and wet for the rest of the day. And it was terrible then, but it's funny later.
Yeah. So in what ways can historical archaeology inform our understanding of modern social issues?
So I think we need to understand our history, to understand our present and possible future. It helps us to understand like patterns of consumer behavior, health, changes to societal norms, such as like gender roles and sexuality. All of these things have patterns. And if you look at things through time, yeah, things change, but there are a lot of similarities. In the last few years, like sexuality and gender have been like big political and social topics. Some folks claim that gay and transgender people are kind of a new phenomena, when there is documented evidence going back like hundreds of years that cultures across the world have recognized and even celebrated variations in sexuality and sexual practices and in gender expression and definition. I think, an easy way to relate this simple kind of example is like how certain colors are gendered. Pink is for girls, blue is for boys. But that was not always the case from the 1700s until about the end of the Victorian era, which was about 1900. Pink and blue colors were, sort of equally worn by both boys and girls. And there was a lot of clothes sharing because people didn't have these huge wardrobes, right? But in the early 20th century, there was a shift. And according to a Ladies' Home Journal article from 1918, blue became the preferred color for girls and pink was for boys. This was likely a marketing tool. If clothes colors were no longer interchangeable, then people would have to buy more things since opposite gender children could no longer share clothes. But you can see how like something as simple as wanting to influence consumerism can roll into gender roles, right? And gender expression. So everything's connected. And I think looking at that through history, you can sort of see the thread that goes through it from them until now.
Do you feel that studying anthropology has kind of helped broaden your view and perspective on the world?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yeah. One of the first things they teach you in like Anthro 101 is cultural relevance, which is not judging a culture based on your own cultural views. And, I think, being able to sort of take judgment out of stuff and look at what people do and try to understand why they do it rather than immediately, looking at it through your own lens is really important. I think anthropology helps us all be a little bit more compassionate and inclusive.
And I wish universities or even high schools would kind of offer an anthropology course or I know colleges do, but they don't make it a requirement. They just list that you have to take a humanities elective or some sort, but not a lot of people will take an anthropology course because they're like, I don't know what that is. Not going to risk it. I'll take something like art appreciation or something. But I definitely feel like it's something that should be offered in the like high school or even middle school, because that is when you're getting out a little bit more into the world and kind of realizing what's going on. It's not just your family members who are influencing your values and opinions. You're now surrounded by a lot more people who may be a lot different from you, and having to understand that being different is okay. I think it's something we need to teach at a younger age, because you get better adults when they're more empathetic to everybody else's differences.
I agree.
Well, before we get to our final 4 questions of the night, is there anything we haven't discussed today that you'd like to inform the listeners about?
I don't know. Maybe ask me that after we finish up the questions.
Yeah, of course. So, first question is, what is the best piece of advice you'd offer to someone who wants to get into historical archaeology?
I think probably similar to the advice that I gave for, getting into grad school is, find your niche, find something that you're an expert in. In cultural resources management, the strongest firms are firms that have a variety of people with a variety of skills. And so, finding something, we have people on our team that one guy is a starch grain analyst. So he's at the little starches left behind in bedrock mortar cups. That is a niche, right? And we have people that are lithics experts. So they really understand stone tools. We have a guy on our team who is a geoarchaeologist. So he looks at the dirt. So finding something that you're excited about that, you can be an expert on. It's important for us to, have a broad understanding of everything, because even though I'm an historical archaeologist and that's what my area of expertise is, I still have to know about Native American archaeology. So yeah, just finding your niche, finding something you're an expert in, and market yourself. When I first started at my firm, I was a new hire and they gave me some initially I was just doing sort of tedious, like transcription and like easy tasks when I wasn't out in the field. So when I was in the office, they were keeping me busy doing really easy things like lab work and transcribing site records and things like that. And about 5 months in was a Society for California Archaeology conference, and my company was hosting a symposium. And so I saw that as an opportunity, and I presented my master's research in front of my company, and I got noticed. And so I took kind of an opportunity to let them know, like, hey, I'm pretty good at research and writing. And from that point on, I started writing background sections for reports and started to move up.
Are there any changes that you wish to see in your industry?
I'd like to see a little bit more diversity. There's a lot of women in archaeology, which is great, but archaeology is still pretty white. There's not a lot of racial and ethnic diversity, which you think there would be in California, but there just isn't. I would also like to see a larger Native American presence in archaeology. I think that would really be helpful in bridging the gap between archaeology and the Native Americans, because that hasn't always been a good relationship. And it was earned. Archaeology was not kind to Native Americans for a long time. We are, recent decades, we've been working to address that and sort of right those wrongs and ensure they don't happen again. But I would really love to see Native Americans getting into the field and being part of our teams in a different way.
That'd be great because they would offer a more kind of like a local perspective of what their history was in that area rather than you having to go and do research or additional research or archival work. You have someone right there who might be like, oh, I have a family member or, someone in our group or our tribe reservation or anything like that knows somebody who lived for that area or they have records or something. So it'd bring more resources into the field for sure.
Absolutely.
So what do you absolutely just love about your job and the industry you work in?
I love what I've learned. Archaeology tells all the stories, not just the ones in the history books. We get to dig pretty deep, pun intended there. Our cultural history is so diverse, and I love being able to see the things through multiple lenses. I really wish, like we talked about before, I really wish more of us had that opportunity. I've also gotten to see some really amazing places doing field work that I never would have gone to on my own. And that's really neat.
Do you ever get invited to go do any international work at all? Or is it all pretty much domestic?
Well, my company has an office in Hawaii. So we do work. I know that's still technically domestic, but it's completely different archaeology over there. And I know that office has also done some work just in the Pacific in general. But generally, no. CRM firms are pretty, we're limited to the United States and typically to the state in which we, live.
Well, I guess I'll re-ask. Was there anything else that we haven't discussed that you would like to talk about?
I don't think so. I think that's it.
Okay, awesome. Well, I guess my final question is, where can listeners learn more about you and the work that you do?
So my firm's website, which is pacificlegacy.com, and that will tell you about our firm and who we are and the work we do. We are now a 100% woman-owned small business. That happened in just this year in 2024. So that was really amazing. We just also celebrated 30 years. So the company's been around 30 years, and it's just really a great firm to work for. I feel very lucky to have landed where I did with them. If you want to know more about historical archaeology, you can visit the webpage for the Society for Historical Archaeology, and to find out more about California archaeology, you can visit the page for the Society for California Archaeology. There's also Women in Archaeology. I think if you just Google that, you'll get the Women in Archaeology page. If you're interested we didn't talk about this, but I created 2 digital museum exhibits for National Park Service, Rosie the Riveter, World War II Homefront National Historical Park when I was in grad school. And exhibits are still up on their Google Arts and Culture page. So if you want to see what type of projects you can do in grad school, that would be a good one to go visit.
Awesome. Well, it was so cool talking to you and learning all about historical archaeology. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day and talking to me about this.
Yeah, thank you.
If you ever have any new research or any new events or projects, I'd love to have you back on to talk about them.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Of course. Well, you have a fantastic rest of your day.
You too.
All right. Bye. Thanks for listening to another episode of AnthroPuzzled. This show was produced by me. A special thanks to Cheyenne Brewer for editing the website, Leah Akers for the incredible logo design, and to Fiona, AnthroPuzzled's newest intern, for editing the episode descriptions. The music is courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear of Sound and Picture. If you have any questions, you can reach me at abby.letsinger@anthropuzzled.com or as AnthroPuzzled on Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, or YouTube. Until next time.